1 week ago today, I was in Passau, Germany, with Joyce and much of our family vacation. We happened to attend a Protestant church, Evangelische, as the Germans call it, which was a combination church service and organ and choir concert. And of course, the sermon was in German. My German is modest. I got a little bit of it, but not a lot. But of course, the music is the universal language. But then the first item on the text of all the choir pieces, the words for the 121st Psalm. I lift up mine eyes into the hills, whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. These are the words in which I grew up, in this very place. When Harry Wright, my minister in the early days, and for some of you too, who are of a certain age, he would say that every time looking over the Bristol Hills. I lift mine eyes into the hills, whence cometh my help. And this piece was in English, all the rest in German. A very nice sign, I thought. So it's good to be with you, and I share with you two readings from one from the Hebrew Scriptures and one from the Christian Scriptures. First from Proverbs 15, a few excerpts. Proverbs, of course, the great book of wisdom. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. The soothing tongue is a tree watch on tree watch of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. Better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. Finally, wisdom's instruction is to fear the Lord, and humility comes before honor. And from the Christian Scriptures, from the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 34 through 40, these familiar words. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed of my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." On June 1st, 1951, a very nervous, red-headed kid stood in this pulpit and gave his very first sermon. He opened with the words, "Are you a true Christian or a Christian only in name?" I own that sermon in many more ways than one. Reviewing all the sermons I've preached over my career, I just finally came upon this one sermon. It was printed on lined paper, in pencil. Go figure. It is a keepsake not only for its age, but for its message. The poet Maya Angelou was once quite proudly told by a friend, "I'm a Christian," to which she replied, "Already?" So is being a Christian something you are because simply you say you are, or is it something to which you aspire? There is a theological and ethical issue here. It has to do with our basic approach to other people, how we treat them. Take this modern-day parable by that famous author, Anonymous, entitled The Lesson. Then Jesus took his disciples up the mountain and gathered them around him. He taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are they who thirst for justice. Blessed are you when persecuted. Blessed are you when you suffer. Be glad and rejoice, for your reward is great in heaven. And remember what I am telling you." Then Simon Peter said, "Do we have to write this down?" And Andrew said, "Are we supposed to know this?" And James said, "Will we have a test on this?" And Philip said, "What if we don't know it?" And Bartholomew said, "Do we have to turn this in?" And John said, "The other disciples didn't have to learn this." And Matthew said, "When do we get out of here?" And Judas said, "What does this have to do with real life?" And the other disciples likewise. Then one of the Pharisees who was present asked to see Jesus' lesson plan and inquired of Jesus of his terminal objectives in the cognitive domain. And Jesus wept. Admittedly, it is a rather amusing kind of piece, and more than a few teachers have asked for a copy when they have heard me give it in some kind of a talk or a sermon. However, beneath the amusement, beneath the humor, beneath the comedy, there is a very serious note. It is really hard to follow the teachings of Jesus. Really hard. The exact wording of those teachings is a matter of scholarly debate, with various translations and interpretations over the centuries. For me, however, what comes through the kernel of truth in all of this is Jesus as the man for others. This is a phrase used by the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Protestant theologian who was martyred by the Nazis during the Second World War. Jesus as the man for others. I've also described Jesus as the prophet from Nazareth, the title of a book by my Bible professor, as a matter of fact. And I've used the phrase, the gentle Jew, because Jesus taught and lived in the tradition of the Hebrew prophets who sought to speak truth to power, who preached love and righteousness. And of course, Judaism was the religious community into which Jesus was born. The Christian faith really grew up around him, sparked by the disciples and the Apostle Paul, who might be said to be the founder of Christianity, as he rallied the disparate churches after Jesus' death. Well, as you know, I'm a born and bred universalist, and I bend toward optimism and hope. God is love was my mantra growing up in this very building, my church, just a stone's throw literally from my house. My inclination is to see the best in all people, no matter what their intentions. I want to err on the side of taking people positively and not negatively. Gentleness in living and loving is at least, if not my touchstone, at least my goal. However, gentleness is living is having a hard time these days. These are not, in many ways, gentle times. Our nation is at war in a number of unfortunate places around the earth. We apparently are on the brink of a trade war, not only with our adversaries, but also with our allies. Our nation is racked with angry debate over immigration, with its focus on dreamers and children taken from their parents. Our politics are awash in angry words and upset what used to be friendly family and friend conversations. People in high places use language and undertake acts that we used to think were socially and morally unacceptable. We seem to have entered a time of tribal warfare based on politics, religion, race, ethnicity, gender identity, to name but a few issues rife among us. The very air we breathe seems to have become somewhat poisoned, polluted with anger. And anger is one letter short of danger. Now, this wider public world may seem quite far from us. That's the stuff on the TV screen and all the rest. But I submit that it infects our daily lives. In home, and work, in school, and church, and in the public square. We see the unkind culture everywhere. Store clerks who ignore us as we enter, and we stand there waiting to be served. Road rage drivers who cut us off at the corner. Co-workers who are critical of our work habits. Spouses who are impatient with us as we try to be on time for a movie. Parents who lose their cool at the seeming intransigence of their children. Children who blow up and fight on the playground seemingly at the drop of a hat. Sometimes it becomes fatal, as we know from all the school shootings we experience. Television reality shows which pit people against one another for survival. Pro athletes not satisfied with victory who must taunt with anguish. Politicians who trash talk their opponents. You, no doubt, unless you are living in a bubble of which I am unaware, may have your own examples. Author Vivian Paley illustrates our predicament. She is speaking to her elderly mother. Mom, I have an odd question for you. Have you ever witnessed a spiritual event? Her mother replied, something to do with God? A miracle, do you mean? I don't know. Nowadays, it's a miracle that people are nice to each other. I'm not sure about spiritual. A number of years ago, I wrote a meditation to address this issue. I called it Gentleness in Living. It grew out of a very concrete experience during a coffee hour at the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, where I served for many years. It was a debate over a church issue. Surely this never happens in the United Church of Bristol. But in the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, there are occasional debates about church policy and practice. Here were two members, both of whom I knew well, in a knockdown, drag-out argument. The issue, the ski club was going on its one-week ski vacation. At the same time, the annual church canvass was being promoted. And many of the canvass leaders were skiers that were going to be absent. And they were going at it, a man and a woman, hammer and tongs. I was unable to get to them to moderate, as I was talking with other people, but I felt how sad this was. It was an issue, clearly, but hardly one of monumental proportions that required a bitter argument. And I thought, how can we handle the really serious issues of life if we can't resolve the rather trivial ones? And so I wrote a meditation to deal with those encounters that we have with other human beings, trivial and momentous. And somehow this meditation caught on and copies began to appear in church newsletters around the country. A tender, raw nerve had been somewhat inadvertently stroked and touched. And this is what I wrote. I called it Gentleness in Living. Be gentle with one another. The cry comes out of the hurting heart of humanity. It comes from the lives of those battered with thoughtless words and brutal deeds. It comes from the lips of those who speak them and the lives of those who do them. Be gentle with one another. Who of us can look inside another and know what is there of hope and hurt or promise and pain? Who can know from what far places each has come or to what far places each may hope to go. Our lives are like fragile eggs. They are brittle. They crack and the substance escapes. Handle with care. Handle with exceeding tender care, for there are human beings there within. Human beings vulnerable as we are vulnerable, who feel as we feel, who hurt as we hurt. Life is too transient to be cruel with one another. It is too short for thoughtlessness, too brief for hurting. Life is long enough for caring. It is lasting enough for sharing, precious enough for love. Be gentle with one another. Some months later, I received a copy of that meditation, beautifully calligraphy, printed on parchment, along with a letter from a grieving mother in Florida. Her troubled son had committed suicide. She felt the cause of his debilitating depression had been the co-workers who had not been gentle with him. My words had helped her grieve for her son, but more important perhaps, at the same time she wanted desperately to warn the wider world what happens when we are not gentle with one another. Be gentle is still my response to the tough times in which we live. Our churches, it seems to me, are at their best when they are a caring community, when we are living up to our faith as we are partners in what Martin Luther King called a beloved community. Before him, Martin Luther called it the priesthood of all believers. I think of the Jewish aphorism: if one Jew has a problem, the other automatically becomes a rabbi. You don't think of yourself as a rabbi? Well, neither do I. Nonetheless, that's the way it goes. That's what we must do if we are to begin to emulate, create a beloved community. How many of you have seen Won't You Be My Neighbor? Good. A documentary film about the late TV personality, lifelong Republican, Presbyterian minister, Fred Rogers. Joyce and I saw it Thursday night, and I recommend it. We both remember that our older son was a great fan of Fred Rogers. He would not deal with Sesame Street. He did not like Sesame Street. It was too noisy, too fast, too hectic, too non-gentle, might we say. But Fred Rogers, gentle Fred, that was a person to whom he could relate. Now, over the years, I have thought of Fred Rogers as a bit too nice, too gentle for the world in which we live. Now, I find I have changed my mind. In a world in which we hear put-downs of those who oppose us, in which we achieve victory by insult, in which we denigrate others who are different, we desperately need the tonic of gentleness. Even so, every writer, as New York Times columnist David Brooks has written about Rogers. In a judgmental time, he writes, when our leaders preach that winners are better than losers, the successful are better than the weak, Rogers' compassion is striking in contrast to the public diatribe of our time. Brooks concludes that the power is in Rogers' radical kindness when public kindness is scarce. Moral elevation gains strength when it is scarce. And after all, isn't that what trying to be a Christian is really all about? In Matthew 25, which you have heard this morning, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these, my brothers and my sisters, you have done it unto me." That is why I visit a former parishioner in Dannemora prison. One morning, as a complete and stunning surprise to all of us, he snapped and strangled his wife. I did her memorial service, and now I visit him in prison because I remember those words from the Gospel of Matthew. And lo, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. We kind of forget that most of the time. These words are why I align myself with the poor as they seek justice in a terribly unequal, unjust economy. These are hard sayings, these sayings of Jesus. But if the Christian gospel is to be taken seriously, they must be considered, addressed, and as best we can, lived. If gentleness is not an effective political tool, it is at least a moral prerequisite for those who will be peacemakers in the midst of turbulence. We need, I think, to establish that connection between gentleness in the personal and in the public realm. Our world is permeated by inequality when we need justice, which is really love distributed. Our politics is charged with nastiness when we need dignity and respect. Our personal lives are permeated with anger too often when we need kindness. The great philosopher Aldous Huxley summarized his philosophy of life simply. He was a man of great wisdom, great words, many, many books. And he summed it all up in this way. It's a bit embarrassing to have been concerned with a human problem all one's life and find at the end that one has no more to offer by way of advice than this. Try to be a little kinder. After all, as we read in Proverbs, a kind word turneth away wrath. But we need more than the words of Scripture. We need embodied examples of this being lived out in the real world. We need narratives of hope, stories that show us how we might encourage one another in our common struggle to be decent, kind human beings. We're awfully strong, we human beings, but we're awfully fragile too, awfully vulnerable, and we all know it. Some years ago, on a sunny day in Seattle, a priest stopped to talk to a parishioner and her 9-year-old daughter. The little girl had a new jump rope, and amazingly, the priest began to demonstrate the intricacies of jumping the rope to her. And after he showed her how, she began to jump. Mother and priest clapped loudly. Eventually, she was able to jump quite well on her own and wandered off with her newfound skill. Priest and mother chatted for a few moments until the little girl with the saddest, widest eyes possible returned, dragging her jump rope. "Mommy," she lamented, "I can do it, but I need lots of clapping." We all need lots of clapping. Are you a true Christian or a Christian only in name? After all these years, I'm still working on that question and a possible answer. All that I can suggest that in a tumultuous world where confusion whirls about us is that we take time to weigh our words and determine our deeds. What I do know is that in a world of anger and violence, the only protest is gentleness and love. Amen.